Welcome! I'm Mel McGinnis, and I'm glad you're here to join me on the Sophie Scholl Society. Sophie and her brother Hans put together what was known as the White Rose, and in the White Rose were writings based on theology, philosophy that undermine and undercut the Nazi regime during Adolf Hitler. They put this together because they had a burden that their nation would turn around, and that nation could only turn around on sound theology and good philosophy. You see, this is a society in which we talk about the two forbidden subjects, politics and religion. We not only talk about them separately, we talk about them together because they belong with one another, just as Hans and Sophie Scholl brought forth in their writings of the White Rose. This white notebook contains the 6 pamphlets of the White Rose. Last week, we looked at the first pamphlet. In that first pamphlet, this is what they wrote. If the German people are already so corrupted and spiritually crushed that they do not raise a hand, if they surrender their highest principle, their free will, if they abandon the will to take decisive action, if they are so devoid of all individuality, then yes, they deserve their downfall. They also wrote, every individual conscious of his responsibility as a member of Christian and Western civilization must defend himself against the scourges of mankind, against fascism and any other system of totalitarianism. And when they wrote that, they said at the end, we will not be silent. We are your bad conscience. The White Rose will not leave you in peace. They knew that what they were doing was signing their lives over to death, because if they got caught, they realized they would be charged with tyranny and be beheaded by the Nazi regime. They did get caught. They were tried in a kangaroo court, and they lost their lives in doing this very brave deed in their country. We looked at the first pamphlets. Let's take a look shortly at this second pamphlet. In it, they wrote this. At its very inception, the Nazi movement depended on deception and betrayal of one's fellow man. Even at that time, it was inwardly corrupt and could not support itself only by constant lies. After all, Hitler states in an early edition of his book, Mein Kampf, a book written in the worst German I've ever read, in spite of the fact that it has been elevated to the position of the Bible in this nation of poets and thinkers. He said, it is unbelievable to what extent one must betray a people in order to rule it. Do you see what Sophie and Hans were doing? They were unraveling the thought behind the Nazi regime. The Third Reich they saw as a corrupt institution based on lies and deceit, and they had the bravery, they had the courage to confront it. It's interesting, as they write in this second pamphlet, the greater part of its former opponents went into hiding. The German intellectuals fled into their cellars like plants struggling in the dark, away from light and sun, gradually to choke to death. To me, it indicates there was a silence amongst those who were intellectual in confronting this regime. Hans and Sophie saw what was going on. They wrote, if at the start of this cancerous growth in the nation was not particularly noticeable, it was only because there was still enough forces at work that operated for the good, so that kept it under control. As it grew larger, however, and finally in an ultimate spurt of growth attained ruling power, the tumor broke open, as it were, and infected the whole body. And that's where the intellectuals just seemed to scatter. But those two brave young people, Hans and Sophie, discussed their theology, their faith, the philosophy that they read, and composed this second pamphlet to spread throughout the nation there. You can go online, type in these words, "An end in terror is preferable to terror without end." Let me say that again. An end to terror is preferable to terror without end. That's in the second pamphlet. That's a quotable quote that you will find on the internet. They saw what was happening, and they decided to do something about it, in that they not only talked about it, they spread the word, even though they knew it would put them at great risk. You see in their writings a understanding of history and philosophy. And in this understanding of history and philosophy, they cited a essay by Friedrich Schiller. Friedrich Schiller's essay was entitled "The Law-Giving of Lycurgus and Solon." Lycurgus was an individual who basically formed the philosophical groundwork for the oligarchic form of government in ancient Greece, Sparta. Whereas Solon, he was an individual that proposed a republican form of government. And in that republican form of government, it raised people up to do things freely. You see, Sophie and Hans recognized that the Nazi state had similarities to Lycurgus's form of government, which reduced man to a beast and denied individual human creativity. Do you know the Nazis were not in favor of art or poetry? They looked down upon it. It's interesting, as you study the Scholls, they loved poetry. They loved art. And they saw that being done in a government that encouraged the individuality, the freedom by which to do it. You watch as we continue along in our study of this pamphlet, series of pamphlets put out by Hans and Sophie. The combination of faith, good theology, philosophy, and how it resulted in action at great risk, which cost them their lives. Here, we don't have to worry about the great risk at a cost to our lives. We just have to risk in talking about those two forbidden subjects, politics and religion. They're necessary to talk about, and we can do it in a way that's intelligent, persuasive, and engaging. We need this now in our day and age.